show. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
I'm Rickelle. I'm a dietitian and I own Tallent Nutrition and Wellness, which is a private practice where I do nutrition coaching and consulting for athletes and active adults.
How long have you lived in Vegas for?
Pretty much my whole life. We moved here, I think, a few months before my third birthday. So I say I'm from Vegas because I don't know any different as far as, living somewhere. So
And how have you been a Knights fan?
2017.
Okay. And what made you want to go through the nutrition route or dietitian route?
So that kind of came about very randomly. I actually was going back to school. I wanted to do PA school. So I needed a bunch of biologies and chemistries that I didn't get with my psychology degree. And when I went to register, all of those classes were full already. So I discovered, well, I still have all my credits from my psychology degree, so technically I'm a senior. If I declare a major, I can register early, like you get priority registration the next semester. So I kind of scrolled through majors, and nutrition sciences was one of them. I'm like, oh, well, I like food. And I had recently started getting a lot more into health. My dad had passed away about a year prior from pancreatic cancer. So I'm like, well, that could be really interesting. Had no idea what a dietitian was. I didn't know what you did with a nutrition sciences degree. It was just a way to declare a major, really, and it revolved around food. I'm like, cool. And the pre-med nutrition track had all of those like biologies and chemistries. So I'm like, okay, I'll declare that. I don't have to actually finish it, get my classes, and be done. And then I ended up I learned so much. I loved it after just one semester. I started associating how, the impact that nutrition has on health and on your athletics and your fitness. Those were things I never knew in the past. I always knew nutrition as calories and how does that affect what your body looks like. So, beyond that, I had nothing. So, long story short, I ended up graduating with that degree and decided instead of going to med school to become a dietitian. And then now we're here 13 years later. So,
what do you like to do when you're not working?
I don't do all that much these days. I like to work out. And I pretty much do stuff with my kids. They have a lot of sports. I had to cut them down this year to 2 sports per season because now they're both playing. So that's 4 teams I've got to keep up with. So, we're on a baseball field or at an ice rink often, which I love. It's very busy, but I do love doing it. So, between working out and work and their sports and school, I don't have all that much of a life. If I do, though, I really like going to like coffee shops and food. I like eating. So trying new restaurants out is probably my favorite thing to do.
What made you decide to want to go the route of making your own practice, and also why athletes?
Oh, good question. There's a few reasons. I would say for going my own practice, personally, I really wanted to be able to be successful in my career, but also be a good involved mom. I didn't really want to have to ask somebody if I had to pick my kids up early or if I needed to be at their, school party or something. I also I didn't like, if they were sick, having to like call out or something like that. So personally, I just really wanted the flexibility. Professionally, though, I wanted to be able to do things in a way that I found more effective. I worked for a private practice beforehand, and it's a great practice. I loved my boss and everything, but I didn't find the meet with people once a month to be all that effective in terms of like really helping them achieve whatever it is they were trying to achieve. And there were a lot of constraints with insurance where depending what their insurance covered, I either couldn't see them more than a certain amount of times, or I couldn't see them for longer than 30 minutes. And it's really hard to get anything done once a month in 30 minutes, especially if they have zero background or education in nutrition or health. So with my practice, I really wanted to be able to, set my programs up in a way that I found to be effective for them, and not having to worry about what these people telling me what I can and can't do, or how long I need to see my patients for, and stuff like that. With athletes, or why athletes, when I first graduated, I was gonna do my internship, I kind of thought my diabetes or something like that would be my more serious work, and then the sports nutrition would be my fun work, because it's just what I love to do. But at that time, I don't think I quite realized that it was still serious work. And then when I started working with some people who were really sick, I started realizing some of them were former athletes. Some of them it was high school, college, some of them some form of professional. And at first it's like, how did they go from that to where they are now, where they can't even walk for 5 minutes without either having a lot of pain or being able to breathe? And I started thinking back to when I was an athlete, and I'm like, we were never really taught how to eat in a healthful way, or we didn't learn habits that promoted long-term health and health once you retired from sport. So, my male athlete friends were always, it was like, eat whatever you want, you're an athlete, right? There was no healthy habits. It was, oh, you can eat whatever you want, because they weren't overweight or they were an athlete or whatever. For the girls, the female athletes, it was more, well, you shouldn't eat too much because you need to be thin, or you need to look like an athlete or a dancer or a gymnast or whatever it was. So I'm like, that's a problem. That's why so many of these people now, when they retire, are in such bad shape. And sometimes it wasn't even 10 years later. So I also, too, as I started working with more athletes, realized, not only do they need to learn healthy habits for their current performance and for their long-term health, but they're not all healthy now. Just because someone looks maybe fit or they don't look unhealthy doesn't mean that they aren't. So, there are athletes out there who do have insulin resistance, who do have some form of GI disease, so I love sports nutrition. It lights me up, but I also think it's important. There are so many myths and just really, I guess you could say, bad things being taught to these young athletes, and they carry on into their later lives. And I just really want to change that.
That's excellent. So what are some of the myths that they're taught?
Oh, we could do a whole podcast on this probably.
What are some common ones that you would hear? Something
Yeah.
someone comes in as an athlete, what's something that they would normally tell you?
I think one of the biggest ones I see, and I see it with male and female athletes, is basing everything on what their body looks like. I've been even told by coaches, well, this player they don't need help with their nutrition. They look like a Greek god, or, they're ripped, or they're really buff, or whatever it is. And it's like, oh, that doesn't mean everything's going well, or that doesn't even mean that they're performing at their best. That just means they're younger. They probably have some pretty good genetics, and they're lifting. It doesn't necessarily mean they're healthy or performing their best, and sometimes being muscular doesn't necessarily, mean that you are going to be a super good hockey player or soccer player, right? There's skills involved there. And with the females, it's the same thing, except for it's usually the opposite, where, well, if you're thin or if you're toned, then you're healthy, when that's not the case at all. And then, unfortunately, sometimes if someone isn't super lean, they sometimes in the athletic world, they'll think, oh, well, they need to lose weight to be a better athlete. And that's not necessarily the case at all. Your body type doesn't automatically determine, how good of an athlete you are or what your capabilities are. Your performance does. So that's a really big one in that world. Carbs. Carbs are, I think every athlete should be eating carbs. And unfortunately, carbs, kind of depending who you're listening to, are like the devil, and you shouldn't be eating them. And that's just not true at all, especially for someone who's very, very active. So spend a lot of time trying to get them to eat more carbs. Other than that, sometimes it's when they eat. So they've been taught that they shouldn't eat past a certain time, or they need to eat within a certain window. And now intermittent fasting is a lot bigger. So I would say that's become even a bigger issue, which again, with maybe for some people that might work better. But a lot of times athletes already have a hard time consuming enough calories and getting all their nutrients in. So if we're not eating past 5 or 6 or 7, they're very likely starving at night, and they probably still have a lot of food and nutrients that they still need to get in, and they're missing that opportunity. Same thing if you're cramming all that into like a 6 or 8 hour window, especially if you have someone who's a student or maybe an adult who also works. Well, now you're trying to cram all this food in between training and working and school into 6 to 8 hours, and it just doesn't go very well a lot of times.
It makes sense. And I feel like, too, maybe athletes sometimes are more prone to getting caught up with fads. Like if they hear something might work, that they're very fast to try and adopt it because maybe that's the thing that's going to make them a little bit better than someone else. Have you run into anything like that?
Oh, yeah. It's like the magic fix. I think everyone's always looking for that way to get that little extra edge. But the problem is I feel like you're skipping over the whole foundation. So even things like supplements. Supplements are another. I don't know that I've had a client come to me who either wasn't on a bunch of supplements or one of their first questions was about supplements. But the thing is, if you don't have that base, your foundation, like, are you eating enough? Are you getting enough of the macronutrients? Are you sleeping? Are you having rest days? What does your training look like? If you don't have those things in place first, those supplements aren't going to do all that much for you. They're not this cure-all or this magic pill that people think they are. Some of them might be effective and come in handy if you have all that stuff, figured out first. Then maybe. But if not, you're just kind of wasting your money, really, and kind of banking on something that might not even work to begin with.
So how would someone know if they actually needed a supplement or not?
I think so. What I usually do with during my assessments is, just going over all of their habits first. If they're skipping meals, if they're not eating carbs or they're not eating protein, we need to work on all of that first, because there's no supplement. Or if they're not sleeping, if they're sleeping 4 or 5 hours per night, none of those supplements are going to give your body the actual energy that it needs when that stuff's not going well. But sometimes, if there's already a nutrient deficiency, well, then we need to correct it with a supplement. Oftentimes when there's an actual deficiency, you can't get enough from your foods to come back from that deficiency. So you do need some supplementation. Now, once we can correct the deficiency, we may or may not be able to get it enough from your foods. It determines on what are they eating, what are they able to eat. Do they have any restrictions, like medical restrictions, or maybe they just flat out won't eat certain foods? Then we may or may not need to supplement. So like vitamins and minerals, I would say it depends on what is the status, and also what are they eating. As far as performance goes, there aren't all that many supplements that have really shown to be effective and safe long term. But there might be a few. So at that point, it depends, what are their goals? Are they trying to build muscle? Are they just trying to see if they can get slightly faster, maybe have a little more endurance? So depending on what their goals are, we could look at a few different supplements and see if there's any we could test out and see if it gives them that little extra edge.
I feel like with a lot of that, people are really just guessing at what they need based on what they are told or what they see in the magazine, as opposed to actually getting their blood drawn and really checking, am I actually deficient in this thing? I'm just trying to guess.
Yeah, exactly. Almost everyone that's supplementing, they're just going in, and kind of guessing. I mean, they're guessing. They're randomly supplementing with things that weren't even recommended by a doctor or their dietitian. They haven't had labs done in years, if ever, depending on how old they are. And that can be dangerous too. I've had quite a few in the past year. Zinc supplementation became really popular with COVID. And I've had a handful of them who are coming to me on these like high doses of zinc, which not only can be toxic, but it can also interfere with the absorption of other minerals and cause deficiency of those minerals, which then cause the problems associated with the deficiencies. So, that it can be really dangerous if you are just randomly taking certain vitamins and minerals at who knows what, mega doses. You could actually be causing yourself far more problems than you are causing yourself any, benefits.
So if somebody were to have all those that you mentioned nailed down, they have their sleep, they have their macronutrients, when would it be an idea to look at, or what deficiency would you think that they would need to supplement? Or, for example, vitamin D if they don't get a lot of sun, like something like that. How effective can that be in terms of everything else looks pretty good?
Yeah, so I would say, so when it comes to vitamin D, I like to get their lab work first. So almost every client I have after that initial assessment, if they don't already have, relatively current labs, so let's say 3 to 6 months, maybe 12, depending on their health status or if we suspect anything. But if they don't have those, then I encourage them to get those done because I don't want to recommend supplements when I don't know what's going on internally. Vitamin D is one of those. Some people need a pretty high dose because they're deficient. That's not a very uncommon thing. However, I'm not going to just assume you're deficient and put you on like 5,000 IU or more. If your lab work comes back and you have, optimal levels, right? So I encourage them to get lab work that looks at certain micronutrients, and then depending on the results, we would discuss supplementation. Another thing, though, with some of the other vitamins and minerals that we don't really look at in serum, and especially if maybe the client doesn't want to do more advanced, like out-of-pocket testing, I'm going to look at their eating patterns. So what are you eating on a regular basis? And are there any vitamins and minerals that you most likely there's no way you're getting enough of? Then if that's the case, then we would probably discuss the supplementation. Mm-hmm. Ideally, we would first discuss, like, are there ways to actually get these into your diet? Like, can we add certain foods and not have to supplement? But depending on, what they're willing to eat, or maybe if they have any medical restrictions, due to an allergy or a condition, then we may have to supplement instead. Mm-hmm. So I would say it depends on what they're eating, on what I would suspect as far as like deficiencies.
Mm-hmm. Would you say the same in terms of getting blood work before you would recommend a regular multivitamin? Because those are also it depends on what kind of brand you're looking at in general. It's like if you got that other stuff nailed down, are you most likely getting your multivitamin minerals and vitamins?
I would say for your general population, if they're eating a well-balanced diet and they're getting a variety of foods throughout the week, so a variety of foods from each food group, they're probably okay. Sometimes, though, there are certain people, if they have, certain health conditions, or if they're extremely active, such as some athletes and active adults, they might not be able to meet all of their needs. So then something like a multivitamin could probably be, good. And as long as, I like to look through the multivitamins, though, and see how much are you actually getting of each vitamin and mineral, because some of them are really high doses, some of them are really low, so depending on the actual vitamin itself, it could probably be helpful, and if anything, it wouldn't likely be harmful. Mm-hmm. exceptions to that could be your fat soluble, so like vitamin A or D, and even E there isn't like an upper limit for vitamin E, but we do have studies that have shown that like excessive antioxidant intake through supplements can actually, rather be than being antioxidants, they can be pro-oxidants. So like they're doing the opposite of what you're trying to do in excessive amounts. So if it's, a super high dose of A, D, or E, or many of the minerals, then I wouldn't just have somebody taking those, because then they might be getting too much. But like a regular multivitamin mineral, I don't think is harmful for most people. So
What about the gummy varieties? Have you've seen those, and you've probably seen those calcium chews, like as they've been marketed, probably more in like, I want to say the last decade, right? Like
Yeah.
it's probably the Flintstones are probably where
Oh.
like 20 years ago maybe, but now 10
I
years.
haven't seen those in a while. Yeah.
they're
yeah.
still there.
Are they really?
They-
Are
oh,
those
they
are.
vitamins?
Yep.
They still taste the same. I don't know if you've tried
I
them
haven't
recently.
tried them, but I didn't like them then. I'm pretty sure I won't like them now. But Target actually not that long ago had in the front, the little displays, they had their
Really?
Flintstones
I
out.
feel like I haven't seen them in years. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, so they are there. Go to Target.
But does it matter if you get it in gummy form as opposed to pill form? Like, is it probably pretty similar? Or does it affect like the bioavailability of it?
It depends on the form they're using. So, and there's so many different vitamins and minerals, but some of them, there are different forms that are more bioavailable. And in the gummy, they may or may not be able to have that form. So it would depend on, I would look more at what is actually in that gummy to determine. The other issue though with those is there's often so much other stuff in them. It's not just like the vitamin or the mineral that you're wanting. So that concerns me too, is what are you actually getting in that gummy? So are you getting a good form? Are you getting the right amount? And then are you taking in all this other stuff that you don't need? Some of them have a lot of sugar, but it depends, right? So sometimes for kids, especially young kids, I think it's a good way if they need to take something. It's a good way to get them to take it. Depending on their age, they're not going to swallow a pill. Some of those chewables are gross, in my opinion. So, if your kid won't chew the vitamin, then the gummy might be ideal. So I think it depends on the person. Same thing with an adult. I don't see why most adults couldn't just take, a higher quality
But that tastes
vitamin.
so good.
But if they won't and that's their thing, then getting it in is better than not getting it in. So gummy it is.
So when you started your practice, did you notice a difference in, or I guess, was it surprising to you when an average person and their baseline level of nutrition?
I don't know if I'd say surprising, but yet most people are nowhere near what they should be getting. A lot of people think they are overeating, and they think they're eating too many carbs, or they think they're eating too much fat, and it's very rarely, at least in my practice, the case. Most of them are way under eating. They aren't even getting enough carbs to support just basic physiologic function, let alone all of the activity that they're doing. So it's pretty low. And then now when we start looking at micronutrients, it's even lower most of the time, because they aren't eating balanced diet, but they also aren't eating a variety of foods. So yeah, the baseline's pretty low for most of the people that I work with when they first come to me.
I was just curious because we just have noticed, talking to a lot of different medical practitioners, that the baseline knowledge that people come in with is typically things they've seen on TV or things they've read in magazines or things their friends have told them. So I feel like a lot of whatever tends to be common knowledge is not normally the thing you're supposed to be doing. It seems it's almost always the opposite, or tends to be.
Yeah, a lot of people I would say they're overcomplicating it, which ends up making them feel like they're failing or doing, just eating really badly. So then they just say, screw it. And then they do. They just go eat whatever they want. Or they think they're supposed to be avoiding all these things, so they're being overly restrictive. And now they're starting to have, negative effects from that. I've noticed too, and one interesting thing is a lot of times the people that come to me thinking they are eating just awful, when I start looking into what they're doing, it usually isn't that bad. But then the people who come to me thinking they know everything and they're eating super healthy because they're following all these things that whoever said, they think they're doing it all right. And they're usually the ones that have the most, I would say changes to make. So that's interesting. Like now when people tell me like how awful their diet is, I'm like, probably not that bad. Every once in a while, there's a lot of opportunity, but generally speaking, that's something I've noticed in the past couple of years is the mindset doesn't always match what's actually going on.
Huh, that's really interesting. I feel like I think that's common across a lot of professions too. You're like, well, YouTube says, and you're like, oh, you're right.
Yeah, I have people too when they hear what I do, like other medical professionals, they hear what I do, so I'm in their office or whatever it is, and they make assumptions about what I eat or I don't eat. And it's funny because almost every time, whatever they're assuming I do or don't do, I'm like, nope. So, like I had once I was going in for surgery, so they had to tell me certain things not to eat or not to take, like vitamins or minerals not to take. And they just assumed I took, at the time, fish oils or omega-3s. And I'm like, I'm actually not on that. Or, a lot of people will assume I don't eat dairy or I don't eat gluten or I don't eat this and that. And some of those now are true. I have been gluten-free for a couple years, but it wasn't before, and I do have some dairy. So it's interesting what people assume about you when they hear you're a dietitian.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's almost like they assume what they think a healthy diet is. They assume you do that because you're a dietitian based on what their version of what healthy is.
Yep, exactly. So whatever they think healthy is, depending on the influencers probably that they pay attention to, that's what they think you do. Or they will tell you like, oh, I really need your help because my diet is so terrible. I have dairy every day or I have carbs every meal. It's like, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
Another thing you said too that was interesting that you've brought it back to. It really seems like people don't like they overcomplicate things before getting to the basics, so they don't really learn like what's healthy food or should I just be eating real food. They're always looking for like the things that fill in the tiny little gaps or give them a really really small percent of change when they could just maybe eat a little bit more variety of foods and get way more of a benefit out of it.
Yeah, if they would just eat even, just so many people would benefit if they would just eat your 3 meals per day and don't worry about all the food rules that people have taught you along the way. Stop overcomplicating it, and they would probably just by doing that be better off. So yeah, a lot of people are way overcomplicating it, and then you're skipping over all the just basics that are so important, and you lose sight over it because you're focusing on all these other things that may or may not even be beneficial to you.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the variety of foods. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by the variety of foods?
Yeah, so I would say it's starting with balance, which to keep it really simple would be, are you getting protein, carbs, fat, vegetables at most of your meals? I'm not going to say all because perfectionism isn't a thing, but at most of your meals, do they look like that? If that's the case, well, now we can start breaking that down a little further. Are you, on a regular basis, are you getting foods from each food group every day? So then we can tackle that. I would say variety is when we're getting foods from all the food groups every day, and then we're getting a variety, like different foods from each food groups every day. So like fruits and vegetables, are you getting a variety of fruits throughout the week and vegetables? Or are you eating bananas every day and carrots every day and that's it? Bananas and carrots are great, but the different fruits and the different vegetables have different vitamins. They have different minerals. They also have different antioxidants from the different colors. So you could be still missing out on a lot of those things if you're only eating like one or two from each group. Even like proteins and whole grains, they all have like slightly different vitamins or mineral compositions and stuff. So you might be getting protein from all of them, but if you're getting a variety, then you're getting all those different micronutrients without having to be overly stressed about which foods have this vitamin and which foods have this mineral. Because with all the vitamins and minerals, that can get really complicated and stressful as well. So that's why the variety is really important. It can help with, so you don't get really bored of what you're eating. I found sometimes when people eat the same, they eat your chicken, broccoli, and rice and eat that, 2 meals a day, every day, you get to the point where you want to like puke if you see another plate of chicken, broccoli, and rice. And then what do? You go binge on whatever you can get your hands on, pizza and ice cream and donuts. And so, like, if you can have a variety of foods in your diet, I think it helps you from feeling like you're being deprived or, just getting bored.
Is there any food that you'd recommend that people probably not eat? Like, is there some things that people think that this is a healthy type food when you realize it's either something that people don't need or maybe even be maybe not the best choice?
I do think sometimes, like, I'm not a huge fan of the artificial stuff. So, like, artificial sweeteners and colors. There was actually a relatively new study that just came out, and it was one of the first that looked at stevia along with the artificial sweeteners. And even though we need to do a lot more research on this, but it did seem like it might affect your gut, like the bacteria that are in your gut. I just personally think, like, hey, you're better off eating a little of the real sugar and just learning how to be mindful with it and not being excessive with it than you are putting these other things into your body. I also just get concerned about, like, the long-term effects of those non-food components, because essentially they're not real. It's not food, right? It was created in a lab, and maybe in small doses it might be perfectly fine. I'm sure it probably is. But in some people's diets, when they're getting all just highly processed foods, well, when you're getting it from all angles and all snacks and all meals, is that safe long term? We don't know, but for me personally, I would just rather be safe than sorry. I recommend watching your intake of processed red meats. I'm not saying don't ever eat them. I think having things here and there is generally fine, but the nitrites and some of the chemicals in the processed red meats are what really have shown to cause the increase in cancer, and especially colorectal cancer. So those I don't think we should be eating on like a daily basis, or in large volumes.
So I've had multiple patients come into our clinic, and they sometimes ask us for diet advice, and we tell them that's no way our realm. So we always tell them to get real help with that. But I've had multiple people lately tell me I've switched to vegan for the health benefits. Do you ever hear anything like that in your practice?
Yep, often. So yes, I actually currently have a vegan client. Well, I should say a client who likes the idea of being vegan but struggles to actually implement it. And I've had quite a few people who, when they initially came to work with me, were vegan or were strongly considering a vegan diet. I think you have two kind of camps in a way. You've got your vegan pushers who say that, a vegan diet, that is the healthiest, especially when it comes to cardiovascular health. Then you've got like your carnivores over here who say you don't need plant foods, you just need meat, pretty much. I don't think either is the case. I personally think that you can have an unhealthy vegan diet. You can have an unhealthy diet that has meats. You can have a healthy vegan diet or a healthy diet that has meats. I think when it comes to the vegan diet, it's possible for it to be healthy and for you to get your vitamins and minerals and all your macronutrients, but it does take some planning. I think you need to know what you're doing. So if you're someone who just wants to wing it and you don't want to plan anything out, you want the convenience of being able to go out and eat a variety of foods, the vegan diet probably isn't that great for you because you're likely to end up with a bunch of deficiencies. A vegan diet, to get enough protein, you need to make sure you're eating enough and a variety of plant proteins on a regular basis. You also need to likely supplement with several minerals, especially, and then a couple of vitamins also. And then, you have to be, I would say, more willing to cook for yourself because it's hard. It's just simply harder to find well balanced, like protein containing vegan meals when you go out to eat, or even at many food prep companies. So it can definitely be very restrictive, which I think is hard for people to get everything they need when they're trying to follow that type of a diet. That said, a lot of people aren't eating enough plant foods. And I do think that incorporating more plant foods, such as fruits and vegetables and whole grains and nuts and seeds, are very healthy components to like an overall healthy diet. So my personal approach is to eat a balance of foods and a variety of foods. And if you don't eat meats for, let's say it's a religious reason, a very strong feeling when it comes to like animal rights, or you just are grossed out, you hate meats, you truly just can't eat meats, we can work with that. But if that's not one of the reasons why you're choosing to go vegan, then I would probably encourage you to have your meat proteins, but also incorporating more plants as well.
I've noticed a lot of diets are actually diets of exclusion. Like people pick a certain way of eating, but it means you can't eat these certain things, but they never actually talk about, like, how am I going to get this variety into my diet?
Yeah, it's always like, what can I remove from the diet rather than what can I add? And that becomes problematic because you can be a vegan and remove animal proteins. That doesn't mean you're having a healthy diet. If you're eating potato chips and candy and soda and popsicles, well, those are all vegan. Doesn't mean it's healthy, right? You're missing like so many nutrients, right? So yeah, removing isn't always the answer. In fact, oftentimes I think it's really more, what do I need to add to enhance the overall diet?
I love it. So in terms of like a normal recommendations of activity, and like, how do you know if you need performance nutrition?
So there's a few questions that I would ask to kind of see if we need to go beyond more of just a general diet, healthy diet, and into performance nutrition. One would be, are you working out for greater than 1 hour per day on a regular basis? So, 4 or 5 times plus per week. Are you working out at a higher intensity? So are you doing strenuous workouts for 60 plus minutes per day, 5 plus days per week? Sometimes I would also look at like environment. So are you either doing heated classes that are high intensity, or are you working out outside at a higher intensity where it's hot and you might be losing greater amount of fluid and sodium? I would also say, what are the goals behind these, workouts? Like maybe you might not play a sport. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't need performance nutrition. So if you're doing greater than an hour of strenuous exercise, 5 plus days per week, and or in a hot, humid environment, you probably need some level of performance nutrition. And then, the further out you get from those, the longer the duration, the higher the intensity, then I would say, we probably need even more. So, things to look at would be, do you need carbs during your workout? Do you need additional sodium during your workouts? Do you need to have anything right before? So the amount of time that you'll be going for kind of dictates what you need as far as carbs. Um, Sometimes we have to predict sodium needs because we don't have access to certain tests. Or if I suspect you're, dehydrated or you're losing more sodium than the average person, we can do like a sweat rate calculation, and there are some tests that you can purchase to see the amount of sodium that you're losing. And then that can be helpful too, because now we can personalize like whether or not you need the sodium replacement and how much.
So looking at when you do need to fuel during activity, how would you kind of look at it for different sports? Let's give the example of your ultra marathoner, and then we'll give the example of a power lifter. It's like the complete opposite body types. And when would you need fuel for that activity?
Yeah. So an ultra marathon, so that's a whole nother like ball game. They need a lot of fuel. You have to have fuel with you. I will say, so I actually have a triathlete as a client right now. So, for that person, if we're going 5 to 10 hours, depending on if it's a half Ironman or a full, carbs and sodium and fluid are a huge component. So we're breaking it down beforehand, and we're going every 15 minutes because we have to find easy ways for them to be able to keep up their fuel sources. If you're going for about 2 hours, let's say a half marathon, maybe most people can't run a marathon in 2 hours, but a half marathon to a marathon, you need something, but it's not going to be quite to the extent of like the triathlon. For a power builder, it depends what they're doing. Usually, if it is 60 minutes or less of weight training or strength training, generally water would be adequate. However, a couple exceptions to something like that would be if it's early in the morning and they don't have any time to eat. Then I would say either we want to get some quick acting carbs in you right before you start, or I would probably recommend that your beverage has some liquid carbs in them to get you through that workout. Because a lot of times, if you depending on when you last ate, you get up in the morning, you had nothing, and you do a heavy lifting session, you might find yourself getting lightheaded or shaky if you have nothing except water. So for those people, I would still recommend maybe carbs right before or some carbs during that they can drink until they can have something after their workout. So the early morning workouts kind of throw a little bit of exceptions into if you're working out for 60 minutes or less, you probably can get by with just water. Early morning, it changes it a little bit.
What's something that you commonly see in your practice that you wish more people knew?
Oh, so many things. It's hard to pick one. One, I would say there is no like perfect meal plan that works for everybody. Just because it's something your teammate or your friend or your family member or your coach did, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And there isn't perfect because we all have so many different factors that determine what is perfect for us. So it's what's your history? What's your health like? What's your budget? What are your preferences? What do you tolerate? There's so many different things that factor into what is going to work really well for you, and it can be very different from person to person, even if they seem very similar. There's also too, I think you can't compare yourself to others because, someone who's just starting out, well, you can't compare yourself to what I'm eating. I've been at this for 15 years now. So of course I'm going to have certain things probably down a little better than you, but you're just starting, so I think you can't expect to go from 0 to 100 right away. A lot of people come to me, and I appreciate that they're excited to like make changes and to work with me. But the fact is we have to do like one thing at a time. We have to work toward your goal, and there's lots of steps along the way. It's not a quick fix. It doesn't happen overnight, and you have to be patient and you have to be consistent. And I think a lot, we're just so used to like instant gratification, and we want the big sexy things. And it's like, the reality is the changes that are actually going to be maintainable aren't those like rapid changes. So I wish people could kind of embrace that a little more and just understand that it's working, but you have to trust the process. You're not going to see something the next day.
And what's something you've learned, whether that's professionally or personally, that you'd wish you knew sooner?
Oh, that's another one. That's hard to pick one. I think I've learned a lot over these last few years as an entrepreneur. One, I've learned that I didn't know what I was doing. So I think I think one thing people should know is entrepreneurship is not easy. There seems to be this big push in the last 2 years for everyone to just go off and start their own thing and leave their job and all this stuff. And people aren't showing you all that goes into it. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I've learned. And while there can be many benefits to being an entrepreneur and having your own business, there's so much that you don't see. It's not for everybody. It's a hell of a roller coaster. It costs more than I think people realize, and it isn't like we aren't just sitting around most of the week, right? Like, I don't sit around I don't work 10, 20 hours and then just go sit around on a beach all day like people envision it. It's like, maybe you can get to that point one day, but there's a lot of work that goes into it up front and for a while. So that's one thing I've definitely learned, and it kind of drives me nuts now when certain people on social media are like, oh, you do this, you just don't work for anyone. And I'm like, there's a lot of perks about having a stable paycheck or insurance or not having to worry about where your clients are coming from. I mean, so that's probably the biggest thing I've learned.
And what's something you've been working on personally, professionally, physically, or mentally that you're excited about?
I'm working on a lot. I'm really excited. This past year, I've been really trying to focus like my marketing and my, more into a specific niche. I was really scared to like do that, but I'm more and more, I'm trying to, really speak to like athletes or just very active fitness driven adults, because it's what I love. So that's exciting to me because it's been a huge fear of mine, and it still is, but it feels good when I do it. I'm planning on doing some more non-one-on-one coaching. I really want to expand the ways that people can work with me and that I can help create awareness and educate others. So that's a work in progress. So I'm excited to like really start diving into that. September is kind of my start date for my first project that I'm doing. I've been wanting to get a blog up and going. So September, I'm doing a course and kind of going to get that going in that direction. Personally, I'm kind of my own health journey. I really actually probably need to talk to you guys. I need to work more like on my like stress management, and also like stretching. I've lost a lot of my flexibility and my mobility, and it's something I've wanted to do for 3 years now, and I just haven't prioritized it. We have so many things going on. So that's something in the coming year I'm excited to really start addressing as well.
And how can people find you?
At the moment, I'm most active on my Instagram, which is at Tallent Nutrition. It's Tallent with 2 L's. I do have a website, but again, this is my new venture. So I got rid of my old one and I started from scratch on my own, and I know nothing about tech. So it's up. They can contact me through there, but just don't expect a lot of good content and pretty stuff for a while, but it is coming. So that is tallentnutrition.com. And then I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook if people aren't on Instagram.
And what do you want to leave with listeners with?
Oh, work with consult a dietitian. Please stop listening to like influencers that are not nutrition experts. Even other medical professionals, most of them, and I'm sure you guys know this, don't get any nutrition education, or they get like one day in med school or something. If you're really struggling, go talk to a dietitian. It will cost you less financially, but also it will cost you less time, less stress, potentially less negative health effects or negative, performance effects if you just go talk to someone who knows what they're doing and can help you. So yeah, not your aunt, not your friends, not your favorite influencer. Go see a dietitian, and a dietitian that specializes in what you need help with.
Well, thanks for your time. We really appreciate you being on our show.
Thanks for having me.
We'd like to thank you for listening to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the time with our guests as much as we did. It would help us out so much if you could share, subscribe, or review our podcast, or any combination of the three. Thanks again, and remember to take care of yourself.